Hello and welcome back to the FSF Podcast. I am Tim. I am your host. And as a reminder, this is a show that is made by nerds for nerds. So welcome to the Nerdatorium. Now, our guest today is an animator, a storyboard artist. He's been a screenwriter, a producer, a director, and he's helped bring to life shows like Darkwing Duck, Chippendale's Rescue Rangers. Now, he's worked on other shows like Aladdin, Hercules, Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, Atlantis, Hellboy. There's a lot of other things. Like, he seriously has a really cool resume, and you guys should go check it out on IMDb. In fact, there'll be a link down below in the show notes for you guys to be able to check out this man's work. I am so very excited to welcome Tad Stones to the FSF Podcast. Welcome to the show, Tad.
Happy to be here. I'm expecting a little fanfare, a little trumpet, but I'm sure you'll put that in afterwards. Sure.
I absolutely can. We have the technology. I can make that happen. Whose interview was it? I think it was Candy Milo. When I talked with her, she wanted just random laugh tracks just inserted in the most
inappropriate places. Yeah.
So we that's what we did. Where I was like, okay, well, that's what you want. I'll make sure that gets added to the interview. Right. So yeah, there's if anyone goes and listens back to the Candy Milo interview, you'll find just really awkward timing on laugh tracks, canned laughter. And if you have listened to that and you thought, wow, this is really bad timing, why is it there? It's there for a reason. Okay, so enough about Candy, although Candy is amazing, and you guys should all check out Candy Milo. She's an amazing voice actress, and who has a new book coming out, so you guys want to check that out too. Anyway, we're here today to talk about Tad and the work that Tad does. Now, Tad, one of the first things that we always like to do with any of our guests is talk to them about their origin, how they got started in doing what they do, and why they chose to become what they are. Part of that is I like to know what makes people tick. I like to know what, kind of the what ifs and the hows behind what they're doing. So in the story of Tad Stones, what was the deciding factor rather for you when you said, I think this is what I want to do, this is who I want to be?
Well, my dad wanted to be a cartoonist, like an editorial cartoonist. But when he graduated from USC, he used to do cartoons for the campus humor newspaper and the Daily Trojan. Although for the Daily Trojan, he actually had to carve linoleum blocks, whereas the humor comic allowed him to actually use pen and ink. Anyway, when he graduated, it was like the Depression, so he had to take what job he could get, and didn't spend as much time chasing his dream. But what I inherited from that is all the art books, and especially the cartooning books and cartooning, basically, a mail order school type things that he had. So I learned about comics and some animation as I was growing up. He had the famous cartoonist course, also, which is part of the famous artist course, which used to be an ad on the back of every comic. Anyway, that was full of, Milt Caniff, who did Steve Canyon, Al Cap, who did Little Abner, and these classic comics. And I just soaked up the material that way. And then he also had books on animation, so I was really familiar with it. Add to that the Disneyland TV show, the original one with Walt. Every once in a while, he'd go behind the scenes and do a something about animation, like the plausible impossible, about the cheats you can do in animation. And Walter Lantz hosted a show of Woody Woodpecker cartoons that he drew in between and talked about animation. So I was just fascinated by it. I always wanted to do it. However, in high school, I basically came to the realization that, look, the only place I want to work is Disney Studios, because they're the only ones doing full animation, and they've got their guys. So, meanwhile, I've been reading comic books since I was a little kid, and I thought maybe I should go into comic books. I wrote a couple of sample scripts, sent them off to Marvel, and actually got at least one had suggestions on it. Then I went to college, and instead of keeping it up, it was just like college life consumed me. but anyway, as I tried doing comics in my spare time, excuse me, a comic strip, my junior year, I realized, oh, this is my last summer, and then real life begins. And so I spent the whole summer trying to do gag cartoons for magazines, because magazines actually ran comics back then. Um, that paid off later when I was trying to come up with story ideas working on feature films. But it was just, 8 to 5, my own hours of coming up with gags, learning to think funny. Um, anyway, in my senior year of college, uh, I was I had only been an art major my freshman year, and then my English teachers wanted me to switch to English because of my writing, and I found this new major called humanities that I thought it sounded like I could do both, that part of it, and maybe in theory that was a possibility, but I ended up taking no more drawing classes. It was all like metalwork, jewelry making, most notably those ceramics and sculpture. And that paid off when my ceramics teacher became head of the department. Important for what's coming up.
Okay.
Anyway, I was working at the radio station. I thought, oh, should I go into radio as backup? What do I do? The suite mate of my girlfriend at the time, her father was ex Atencio, uh, who was a major Disney layout man, story man, worked with Ward Kimball on the Man in Space specials that were part of the Wonderful World of Disney.
Mm-hmm.
Then he moved over to WED, which you'd now think of as Imagineering, designing Pirates of the Caribbean and helping write the song, I think. Anyway, his daughter said, "You should see about the Disney training program." And I said, "What Disney training program?" And she gave me the name of the guy to call up. Hard to forget the name. His name was Donald Duckwall. I called up just for information, and by the end of the phone call, I had an appointment to bring in my portfolio, which of course I didn't have. I think a week later, maybe 2 weeks at most later. So I had to create a portfolio, and luckily, going back to my ceramics teacher, I was a TA in ceramics, so I was his assistant, and he had just taken over the department because the original person was on sabbatical, and he loved Disney. He could do the Goofy yell, and he demonstrated it for me. So he helped me sit in on life drawing classes and just anything he could do to help me quickly turn out some drawings. And then I, drew from television. They wanted to see action poses and things like that. I ended up going to the meeting. They saw some of the comic strips. They say, "Oh, these are cool, but we're going to put them aside because we're interested in this type of sketches." They asked for a few more. I did a few more, largely picking up those rules I had learned in that famous artist cartoonist course about
Mm-hmm.
the sports drawings, how they would exaggerate motion and in a still figure. And I used those techniques as I worked on the portfolio, and that really helped. And I was accepted into the training program, which meant you had to do an animated test, just working with Eric Larson, one of Walt's 9 key animators. And I survived the first one, did a second one, survived that one. And then you got plunged into, at that time it was the original Rescuers, doing an in-betweener, which is the bottom rung of animation, where
Mm-hmm.
you're literally doing the drawings in between the animator's drawings. But you learn the process, and the only way you get up or get promoted is to do more personal tests on your own time. So I kept on coming up with this kind of longer origin. I kept on doing personal tests and then stopping them because I thought, oh, I got a better idea. Until one day, the manager of the department was walking by my office, and I said, "Hey, I'd come in here. I was thinking of going back into this test and finishing it up to show the review board." And he said, "Oh, it's don't bother with it. Show it as is. This is great. Let's show it next week." I went, "Oh, great, less work for me," and that encouraging remarks. And then he said, "Yeah, we had just about given up on you." What? Because I kept working on tests and not showing anything to anyone.
Oh, okay.
So they thought it was just like, they have guys who just come in and they just are here at the studio and they never move up. Um, anyway, it was kind of like near heart attack. It was like, isn't there like an employee review every 6 months that you could have dropped a hint? Um, anyway, I showed that test. I did another test and became an assistant animator. I have one animated scene in The Rescuers of Bernard Mouse tiptoeing across a desk and being startled by a cuckoo clock. Uh,
I remember that
and then
scene. Yeah.
I basically realized that I was more as much as I love the process of animation. Um, I had more interest in figuring out the characters would do what they would do, as opposed to making them do it. So instead of being an actor, I realized
Okay.
I wanted to be a story man. I wanted to be a writer, and that's where all those training my brain to come up with short gags and that I had done that previous summer all paid off, because back then we didn't use scripts. They kind of talked out the story, and then each sequence was built visually. So that was
Oh,
my
okay.
origin of getting into Disney Studios, because I started in feature animation.
That's a really cool background story. I love the fact that they're like, yeah, we almost gave up on you.
Yeah, you think they could have mentioned it.
And yeah, I think that for me, I think that also would have been a little heart attack inducing.
Hmm.
Especially if that's, from the sounds of things, that was kind of like the goal, the dream job where you wanted to be what you wanted to be doing as a young man, you know. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
It's funny. I look back, it was almost like you expected him to be like a school counselor who says, "Hey, we're wondering how you're doing." But notoriously, I had like terrible counselors all through my educational career. I mean, I had out of high school nowadays. I mean, I had a granddaughter who just graduated. She was accepted into 13 universities and had
Oh,
all
wow.
these different things she had done, president of the student body, basically genius. And that's not just a grandparent talking. That's her and her brother and her little sister are all like next level. Uh, anyway, my I don't even recall a meeting with my counselor. In fact, I ended up at the school at Loyola Marymount University, just when it was still Loyola technically. Um, that just because one of the teachers at my high school had just started a job there, and I said, "Well, do they have an art program?" And he goes, "Oh, well, they're just combining with Marymount, and I think they have a really good art program." He said, "Okay." I'm not even sure I saw a school catalog, but I just applied to two places, World Chapman College, World Campus Afloat, that my sister had
Hmm.
done, which you basically go around the world on a boat. But I can only get that if I got a company scholarship from my dad's company, and all my sisters had gotten scholarship. I was a little too honest. I said I wanted to be a cartoonist. I don't think that went well. And then I needed a backup, so I just from this chance meeting on the school campus, I said, "Yeah, I'll apply there." So I applied. Was it the other place didn't accept me, or no, the other place accepted me, but I didn't get the scholarship. So I guess I'm
Ah,
going to Loyola Marymount, which is where
there.
I met that girlfriend, who had the sweet mate. And of course, I married that girlfriend. So we're coming up on 50 years now. So that was a good thing.
That was a good
Uh,
choice.
yeah. And, it was just the lack of direction, just pure luck that kind of followed me through, yes, I'm very lucky for that matter.
All right. That's good. All right. Let's talk about one of the shows. The reason why I wanted to have you on this show is because, once we were talking pre-show, and I said, sometimes when Facebook sends me suggestions of people to meet and talk with, it's not always somebody I want to talk with, but I saw your name and I looked you up and I saw that you had worked on Darkwing Duck, and I'm a huge Darkwing Duck fan. So I guess for me, the biggest thing is I want to know the story behind the creation of Darkwing Duck. How did this concept come to be? Um, with him being this duck that's a caped crusader.
Yes, this daring duck of mystery, a
Yes,
champion of right,
exactly.
swoops out
Exactly.
of the shadows. Yeah, he kind of owns the night. Um, he has a very clear origin in that Jeffrey Katzenberg, and this is before he left Disney and founded DreamWorks with Steven Spielberg. Um, he ordered me to do those guys, Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg. They loved um, cute names for shows, something that was intriguing, because your job is to create a show that will hold an audience. But their feeling
Okay.
is if you have an intriguing name, that more people will come in the first place to check it out, and then it's your job to hold on to them. And we had done an episode of DuckTales called Double O Duck, which was a Launchpad episode, and
Mm-hmm.
as a James Bond, parody. I had nothing to do with that one. That was just a standalone. Uh, anyway, so he liked the name, and the only instruction was it can't be Launchpad. The whole point is to create a new character with new, secondary characters and merchandising and all of that. So I went off to do Double O Duck, which I was not thrilled about, because I thought it's just going to be a James Bond parody. How exciting is that? Um, anyway, I went in and did it, and pretty much it was just a straight James Bond parody with, here's the guy who creates all the inventions, and, here's the kind of spy stuff we're doing. The only thing that made the show unique that they liked was we said um, his life is complicated by this little girl, his daughter, who refused to stay at home, basically, that she was more than a handful. So he had to balance raising a little girl and the spy world that he was going to be involved in, and keeping both sides apart whenever he could, which of course he couldn't.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
was liked, but he said you've got to do actually. Really, he saw the first version, which was just the James Bond parody, and he said, "Do it over," because he thought it had no Disney heart. He basically exactly what I thought. The problem is, I should have been professional enough not to pitch something that I didn't believe in. Um, so went back to give it the heart. We came up with that idea of a daughter being involved. Um, anyway, along the way, back then, most of our top talent were on term contracts with Disney,
Okay.
meaning the philosophy of the early TV studio was let's find really great, talented people and then lock them up for X many years with an option for more, kind of thing. That went for
Mm-hmm.
artists and writers. Um, anyway, and nowadays you just get hired to do a show. It's like we're going to hire you to storyboard on, whatever the latest show is, and then when the show ends, you end. And that goes to the very top people. Once you've done the allotted episodes, that's okay. You're done. Please pitch us something else in the future. But when people are on term contract, basically Disney owns everything your brain comes up with. So you could just say, I need to brainstorm some stuff. So I invited a lot of the guys I wanted as story editors who are already on staff to, go through the pitch that we had and just brainstorm what could we do with it. Now we had the design of of Double O Duck at the time was pretty much a generic Donald Duck looking character, like a generic DuckTales duck, in a
Right.
white tuxedo. But since we wanted to play, not that it made sense, and it's like I wish I could remember the exact day in the conversation, but the idea that we wanted complications from the neighbors, not knowing who he is, and the daughter, and all of that, we put him in a mask and like a pork pie hat and a cape, which was not very James Bondish, but nobody questioned it. We just did it. Um, anyway, one of the story editors was Dwayne Capizzi, who had done Men in Black and, uh, 'Cause, you know, Capizzi was, you know, he was gonna be involved in, the daughter and all of that. We put him in a mask and a cape, which was not very James Bondish, but nobody questioned it. We just did it. Anyway, one of the story editors was Dwayne Capizzi, who had done Men in Black and the Jackie Chan adventures and
Mm-hmm.
Turtles, I think, and then, and he's done a lot since. Anyway, Dwayne looked at this tuxedo guy with, the mask and cape, and said, looking at him, he doesn't seem like a spy. He looks more like a pulp hero, like the Green Hornet or the Shadow. And that was like a light
Mm-hmm.
bulb over my head to me because I love that stuff. Not, I don't know, it's too young to have heard that on the actual radio, but certainly I had tapes and knew about pulp magazines from my comic collecting. Uh, anyway, that gave me a new template of, ooh, Doc Savage used to have a bunch of experts helping him. One was an engineer, and one was
Mm-hmm.
an electronics guy, and one was communications. And this guy was a real prissy Englishman, and this guy looked like an ape, and they were constantly sniping each other. And it was like, oh, great, these are all these personalities I can use, and it's not James Bond, Moneypenny, Q, and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah.
However, as we worked on it, we kept having to pare down the number of characters because, and even Launchpad was part of it. He got thrown in there. Um, it was just, it's like these are too many characters to deal with to give them entertaining things to say and do. And then plus you can now have to add in the villain, and maybe the villain has a henchman and a victim. Suddenly you've got all these people in every episode. So we kept paring it down until once we had the little girl, it was like, oh, the little girl has to, you know, find her way onto these adventures. And then we basically came up with, well, you know, who's the sidekick who works well off this ego-filled personality of Double O Duck, and that ultimately became Launchpad McQuack. Because we had tried other guys, but it just seemed Launchpad fit the bill, and we kind of reworked Launchpad and beefed him up visually and took away IQ points from him, and actually let him be a
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
pilot, much better pilot than he was in DuckTales. Um,
Yes.
anyway, we pitched that, huge success. So we were on our way to do Double O Duck. Hadn't started the real, I had written a Bible, I think, with some possible villain types. But while we're doing that, basically, Cubby Broccoli was the name of the producer who owned the rights to all the Bond books and was doing, producing all the James Bond movies. And they said, Double O is not a thing. That's Ian Fleming created that for James Bond. So you can't use that name, because what Disney had done is taken out double page ads in the trades announcing Double O Duck. And meanwhile, they're trying to do
Oh,
serious James Bond movies. And it's like, we don't need basically a cartoon character making fun of our franchise,
sure.
undercutting it. Um, so they still love the show. Again, syndicated television networks were already signing up for it. So we needed a new name. We had a contest with a $500 reward or prize, which was pretty good, 1990 money.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Fantastic.
and that was won by, I mean, basically it was every alliterative name you can think of, and some not so much. Dead-Eye Duck, you know, Dummy Duck, Deadshot Duck. Um, the quivering, every quack and webfoot and all of that. Uh, anyway, it was Alan Burnett who came up with Darkwing, which I instantly liked. And it wasn't like there was anything close. It wasn't like, well, here's the top five. It was like, no, here's Darkwing, and here's a bunch of trash. And all I added was Duck to it, because I said Darkwing is this great name. That's the character he thinks he is. And then the duck just makes it sound goofier, and that's close to the character he is. Once we lost the double O, I felt free to. We still had the spy organization, that was still part of it.
Sure. Yeah.
But my feeling, I got to move away from the spy world and instead dove into the comics that I grew up with, which was the silver age of comics, when the covers were the silliest, they were goofy stories. It was just, there was no continuity. So I actively fought continuity in Darkwing. He has like 6 origins, I think. Anyway, and that really freed it up to become the character, that that everybody knows.
I love it. That's really cool. I I had, I didn't know about the Double O Duck portion of it, so that's kind of cool. Um, although I kind of now want to see him as a really bad mimic of 007, but
Well, we
yeah,
did some episodes where it was more spy oriented. Those are premises that came
true.
up when he was,
Yeah, that's true.
being a secret agent. But another thing that happened to us that was very lucky is you'd get a mid-level executive assigned to your show, somebody who would know the show, and their job is to kind of keep you on track from what you pitched originally and what was bought by the studio. And
Okay.
we had a newer executive called Greg Wiseman, and Greg had been an associate editor at DC Comics. So he knew every reference that we were making and could bring new stuff in. Even though he was just supposed to be giving notes, he would, of course, but he could also give suggestions. Greg went on, of course, to create Gargoyles. Uh,
Oh,
and
okay, cool.
and so, he was a creative person too. And he told us once that, look, my job is to give you notes, but it's your show. You don't have to take my notes, but that's my job. Although he would wear you down because his points were always well taken. So we ended up taking his notes. And I always point out that I never repeated that while we were doing the show, because the last thing our boss would want is some executive saying, "Oh, you don't have to listen to me." So, thank goodness for
Nice.
Greg and for keeping things quiet.
Oh, I love it. So we talked about my co-host Kathleen, and she's not able to be here tonight. But Kathleen is also the only person I've ever met who got grounded from watching Darkwing Duck
Really?
as a kid. Yeah, she got grounded because she was consistently going up to adults and telling them to suck gas, evildoer.
Yeah.
So
So that was some of our early feedback, because he used to have that as a catchphrase. We stopped using it because people didn't always hear the G of gas, and so parents would say, "What do you have this character saying?" And so we had Jim. We told Jim Cummings to, like, you really have to enunciate that G.
hit that G on that gas, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kathleen got banned from that. As a matter of fact, when we had Michael Bell on the show,
Oh, cool.
and so he did a whole voice as Quackerjack to send to Kathleen's mom
Oh, that's fantastic.
about her grounding, and it's pretty fantastic.
Was he
He
on her mom's side saying, "I don't need these
oh no,
people"?
he was on Kathleen's side.
Uh,
Kathleen's mom want to come out and play, or something like that, and then he said a couple other things, so it was pretty entertaining. But yeah, so that was a fun little side note there. Every time I get a chance to tell somebody that Kathleen got grounded from Darkwing Duck, I think it's one of the most innocuous shows ever that you could ever get grounded from, but she pulled it off because she was telling people to suck gas, evildoer, with a G,
there
gas
you
with
go.
a G.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, all right.
Well,
So
what's fun is when, again, I started feature films, I
right,
was like 5 months after Ron Clements, who did Aladdin and Little Mermaid and Moana and everything in between. He with John Musker. And about 3 months before, Glenn Keane came to the studio. So those were the guys who, are on either side of me. They stayed in features, obviously. Uh, when they did a feature film, they could go sit in the audience and hear the reaction. And I didn't get any of that. We were doing television. And by the time our stuff aired, of course, we were working on entirely different episodes. Um, we had Nielsen numbers, or we were told, "Oh, there's good reviews," or "the numbers are really good," but there was none of that visceral stuff until I retired and started being a guest at conventions. And then I got to, talk to the fans. And one of the biggest fans in the world was Frank Angonis, who was the co-producer on the DuckTales reboot. And Frank was
oh okay,
Darkwing Duck for Halloween 3 years in a row, and got out of a book report once by doing a report on an episode of Darkwing Duck. And when I first met him, he was saying, "Oh, Tad, it's one of the worst kept secrets of the studios that Frank wants to do a Darkwing Duck show." Uh, but so
Yes,
he
please.
introduced him into DuckTales, but ultimately they didn't go for for that direction. Um, but yeah, he understood the show very well because when I first met him, I said, a very important part of the show is Goslin. That's the relationship. Because at conventions, I would have people who had rough home lives saying that
Hmm.
Darkwing and Goslin's closeness was like an anchor to them. Um,
Oh
and
wow.
Frank soothed me. He said, like, "Oh, Dad, we know that the show is Darkwing Duck is a show about a father and a daughter and a launch pad." So I said, "Okay, you get the show."
That's cool. All right. All right. So we talked about this pre-show as well, and this is something I looked up. This is off the topic of Darkwing Duck. This is on to Chippendale's Rescue Rangers. So you may have answered this in other interviews, and if you have, I apologize, but I just can't. I couldn't find it where it was something the answer that I think I have. I couldn't find it coming from what I felt was a credible source.
Okay.
So I apologize if you've been asked this before, but I figured, hey, I have you here. I
You
might
want
as
to know
well.
why they don't wear pants? I know. Everybody has
Actually,
thoughts.
no,
So.
no,
Oh, okay.
no,
Something else.
no. It has
Yes.
nothing to do with the pants, but it does have to do with their dress because the rumor is that they're modeled after Magnum PI and Indiana Jones.
I will
Is
say
that
no and
true?
I will say no and yes. What it
Okay.
was is that the original pitch for the Rescue Rangers didn't have Chip and Dale in it. It was the lead character was Kit Colby, and he was a mouse, and he wore this aviator jacket with a like lambskin collar or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's a different group, and they flew around on a nearsighted eagle and all that. And then uh, when we pitched the show, Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg loved the show. They thought the show was great, but they said, we just don't feel anything for the lead character. And I said, well, maybe I didn't pitch him right. And they said, no, no, you pitched us two characters, Robo Duck, what it was called at the time, and Bubba Duck. We got those guys in two sentences. This guy we don't feel anything for. So, and Jeffrey
Okay.
said, Ted, take the good news. It's a great show. It's just not a home run yet. And then the meeting continued, and we talked about, DuckTales had been such a huge hit. They said, are there other of the Disney classic characters we can come up with that could have a show? And we said, Mickey is too important. We don't want to risk him yet until we know we can animate him. Donald is kind of already in DuckTales in some ways. Goofy, yes, Goofy can be every man. He can be anything.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
over the years, they pitched Detective Goofy and Army Goofy and all sorts of things until they came up with Goof Troop. And they got to Pluto and they said, no, we're not going to do a show about the dog. But as soon as we got to Chip and Dale, Michael Eisner said, put those chipmunks in that show. And Jeffrey said, home run. And that's when the show got, approved. And because we suddenly had two leads, that changed the number of characters. Chip inherited the aviator jacket from Kit Colby, and
Okay.
Kit in Tailspin got the name. Uh, we had to dress Dale in something. I forgot, by the way, who said put it, because we wanted this to be a bigger show. It had started way back when in a different form as a cop show, and it's like, no, it's got to be more variety of stories, and we wanted more adventure. So somebody put the hat on him, and I worried that it was too on the nose at the time, but he had the Indiana Jones hat. He
Mm-hmm.
had a leather jacket, although obviously an aviator jacket, so it
Right.
was a little different. And then Dale had to wear something, and I just thought, Aloha shirts were not as ubiquitous as they are now. And it was like, oh, the wacky character would always wear a Hawaiian shirt. So he did. Color models were such that, no, the red looks best, this red and yellow
Mm-hmm.
shirt and a simplified flower design. It came up in doing publicity that, and I might have been the one to do this, kind of like saying, "Oh yeah, it's like Indiana Jones," or somebody suggested it to me, maybe in a question that looked like Indiana Jones, and Magnum PI was a huge show at the time, who wore a red Hawaiian shirt mostly, or at
Right.
least in
Exactly. Yeah.
publicity, and so we said yes for publicity reasons, but really, um, you can argue that yes, there's a lot of Indiana Jones viewed through a chipmunk's eyes. So that part, the show is based on that, but not specifically Chip. Um, and Dale has nothing of Thomas Magnum PI in him, you know. But anyway, that was the origin of that, was just we came up with something that people could grab onto, and those were big shows at the time, and a big movie, obviously. So that's the story behind that. That's why I say
Okay.
no, because we didn't like analyze those shows and movies to say this is how we want to build the character. But yes, in that we went ahead and promoted that in the PR talks.
Okay. So just it was a lucky happenstance,
Yeah,
and then it ran with it.
exactly.
All right, I'm game with that. Yeah, because every one of the interviews or reports that I saw, like I said, there wasn't a credible source, and all of them, made it sound like it was definitely that was the design from the day one, and this was how it was going to happen, and this, everybody's kind of putting their own spin on it, and all these. But
Yeah.
I never found where they credited or quoted someone that was actually part of the production and the development team, and so it all just kind of seemed like a bunch of people just kind of, licking their finger and seeing which way the wind was going, and oh, well,
Well, a
we'll
lot
call
of
it that.
that, there is a lot of that in Disney fandom, and especially with cartoon shows where it seems like, oh, I'm connecting the dots, and it's like, no, that dot wasn't there. It's in your head. Like and here's the other
Headcanon,
thing,
yeah.
there's like 80 people back then. There's like 80 people on a show like Darkwing Duck. Um, there's like rings of knowledge. In other words, there's a very small ring, which is like me sitting across from my boss, and the other development executives. And there's my co-producer, because I tried to keep him out of meetings to protect him, which he appreciated once he started doing a show without me. And then there's like the writers, they kind of know a lot more because they get a lot of notes. People don't realize how many notes, and like a director will say, "Oh, we can cut that line," and we have to come down and they say, "You can't cut that line. See, the line is stupid. We know it's stupid, but putting that line
We
in
know
lets
it's
us do
stupid.
all this other stuff that we got a note on." So, and then you get out from that, and then you have people who are working on the show, and they're doing the same thing the fans do. They're connecting dots. So one of the famous ones is, people will say Darkwing Duck is based on Double O Duck with Launchpad, and another episode that I still haven't seen of DuckTales. I don't know the title of the show. It was Midnight Mallard, where Scrooge McDuck is a superhero. And they said that's what it was
Okay.
based on. And there's some people who worked on the show developing things that they think that's true. And it's like, no, Double O Duck, it was based on the name, but
Right.
I didn't go rewatch that episode. It wasn't like, oh, it's Launchpad, and now we can't use Launchpad for whatever reason. Um, and the other thing, again, he started out as a secret agent, mutated into like the Shadow and Green Hornet, and then blended into the Silver Age of comics via like Flash villains, Batman villains, and Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. That's how it was really important to me to build a fun Rogues Gallery, because that was such, a
Yeah,
fun part of the
absolutely.
comics when I was growing up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Part of the fun of Darkwing Duck is not just Darkwing's interactions between him and his daughter and him and Launchpad, but it's also the interactions between him and the villains, who are just as helpless as he is at some times.
Yeah.
And that's part of the enjoyment of the show, is having
Hmm.
these hapless villains. So all right. Now we're also in a world, though, Tad, of reboots and shows coming back and things along those lines. And it's been rumored that Darkwing Duck is in for that type of treatment in early reproduction. And I don't expect you to know where that is or anything along those lines. But I have somebody pitched me this idea, and I want to run it past you and just see what your thoughts are on it. Okay.
Okay.
And just this is a couple of nerd brains getting together, and that's never a safe thing when we're talking about fandoms. So a producer for our show, John, also Kathleen's husband, I'd like to point out, so we call him producer John. He said that we were talking about this, and I was like, man, be kind of cool if talking about Darkwing Duck. And he's like, yeah, he goes, there's this Darkwing reboot coming up, you should ask him about what his thoughts are on that, and if he would be interested in a Darkwing Duck that's like Batman Beyond. I don't know if you're familiar with Batman Beyond.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So where Bruce Wayne is older and he's passing the torch to Terry McGovern, and there's a lot more going on. And I thought, well, that'd be kind of a cool story for a Darkwing like 2.0, like Darkwing Duck Beyond, or whatever you want to call it.
I actually, way back in the day, I believe I had a half-hearted pitch where my idea was literally that, except Gosling would be the near hero. And
That'd be
Darkwing,
cool.
I always pictured in a wheelchair with his foot out in a big bandage with gout, because in old cartoons, it always seemed like gout was this thing that made your feet swell, and it was like this comical disease, which is actually quite painful. But I mean, I don't recall it being a serious pitch or whoever I was talking to kind of X'd it out right there. The show is being rebooted. It's been in development for I think 8 years, because it really started back after DuckTales, because there was a Darkwing in development with that same DuckTales team.
Oh,
and
okay.
then while they were developing it, suddenly they are going to open it up to other creators within and without of the studio. Technically, I am a consultant on the show, but
Cool.
I will say two things about that. One, I've seen very little. I saw an opening. Here's the idea of the show, and here's the first rough draft of the first episode, and the show has now. So I saw that much and gave notes on that sort of thing. But it's changed drastically since then. I've seen a little bit of footage, some test footage they've done, which looked amazing. But I saw one pitch. It was a rehearsal for a pitch for an executive, and he said, "Oh, I have Tad come in for that." So that was the first time I saw some visuals and all that. But fans online instantly said, when it leaked out that I was a consultant, well, Tad's going to be on the show, so of course it'll be adhere to the continuity, which is ridiculous because I was always the anti-continuity guy. And I kind of feel like if someone's going to develop a character, I mean, he's owned by Disney and all that, they should take their shot with him. And if they want to, I
for
can
sure,
tell
yeah.
them, well, here's what I think the heart of the show is. And, if they ask.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I gave notes on that, and people said, "Oh, Tad's going to make sure it's authentic." And I constantly, and this is, I've been saying this over and over on recent podcast interviews, the definition of a consultant is someone you pay to give advice that you don't have to listen to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's it. So they've got something going. I don't know what stage it's at right now as far as any sort of details or who's on the show and who's producing the show or directing, or if they're at that point yet. But yeah, there will be some sort of Darkwing stuff coming down the line.
I look forward to it. Okay, well, let me ask you this, and this is off the topic of everything that we've talked about so far. And so when I introduced the first question about your origin, I said it's because I like to know why people do what they do, what makes people tick, what engages their mind. And so this question kind of goes along the same line. So I'm looking for suggestions, Tad. What are you reading or listening to that you think everybody else should know about?
I've been doing nothing but packing up boxes because we're trying to get ready to move.
Fair
so
enough.
I have not done a lot of reading. Actually, the reading I've been doing is old stuff, and I have one right behind me. Will Eisner's Spirit is just there's a reason why the Eisner Awards are named after him. If I was going to redo Darkwing, there'd be a lot more. There's a bunch of spirit in Darkwing. There'd be a lot more. So I would say go back to the classics. I was lucky enough using my Darkwing money, I call it, when I sell original art. It was like if I have something frivolous to buy, I can't use the family's money, but Darkwing money I can use. And I bought
Darkwing money.
I bought both artist editions where they scan the original pages of artwork at the original size. And especially at the early days of the Spirit, they were like double size. And you see all the whiteout, the mistakes, the pasted on paper where that drawing didn't work out, and they had to make changes, artist notes and the margins and stuff. And those things are fantastic to study. But
That's cool.
basically, it's worthwhile dipping back into the classics if you like comics, to not necessarily look at the newest thing, go back and see stuff like the Spirit, certainly a lot of Jack Kirby's work, that I grew up with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's value to that. I also listen to a ton of podcasts, and there's, if you like anything with the paranormal and supernatural, which is always part of almost every show I've done, there's a show called Real Life Ghost Stories, which is Emma talks about, people's stories that they've lived through, and talks about famous cases too. And I love her Irish accent, and that's great. And then the other show is, and why am I blanking on the name? And I don't have my phone. And I'm thinking of a name, and I know that's not it. Hold on, because
I believe it's called the FSF Popcast.
Oh, that too, of course.
But for sure, yes, of course.
Yeah. What is it? I can't believe. Oh, Otherworld. That's what it is.
Okay.
And it is a guy. Again, it's a paranormal thing, but he treats it. It's if 60 Minutes investigated the paranormal, it feels like this would be it. In that, if you tell them a story about, I grew up in Scandinavia, and we had this experience by a lake with my sister, my mother, and these entities that seemed to inhabit the lake, and they communicated, and we had this paranormal phenomena. He doesn't just get that story from one person. Anybody they mention, he then interviews them and getting their perspectives. And everybody's memory is,
a little
you think,
different,
oh, I
sure.
have a good memory, or I don't. But evidently, what they've discovered about memories is whenever you retell, when you rethink a memory, that becomes the new memory. That isn't meaning it's accurate. It's your brain is constantly rewriting,
Right.
stuff from your past. And it's really weird. My co-story editor on Chippendales Rescue Rangers, Bryce Malik, actually kept a journal at the time. And we got together, and he gave me the pages of his journal. And that was really interesting, because it's like, whoa, I don't remember that specific thing. But that, obviously, I trust, because it was a journal he did at the time. Anyway, Otherworld is just fascinating. I would start at the early episodes and move through of, stories. And you listen to the people talking about them, and you say, that woman sounds like a regular woman who's not lying to me, but what she's saying is like freaking me out. Anyway, I listen to a few comic podcasts, obviously, and some creative
Okay.
podcasts. So, sorry, I'm not good on the reading stuff, but
That's
comics
okay.
and podcasts, especially that FS. What was that again? Yeah, that one's
Yeah,
good
that
too.
one. It's not so bad. All right. Well, Tad, we are at the point where it would be appropriate to ask you a silly question. So this one also goes back to Kathleen. So her and her daughter were out and about, and somebody asked her daughter this question, and Kathleen thought, well, that's kind of rude. You should never age out of that question. And so we decided to make it our silly question for some time now. And that question is, Tad Stones, what's your favorite dinosaur?
When I was growing up, it was definitely the finback dinosaur. Was that the
Okay.
Dimetrodon? or something like that. But that was one in all the early kind, before they knew how, or had a better understanding of how dinosaurs moved and which ones were in the same era and which ones weren't. I just
Right.
love that big fin on their back. Um, these days, it's hard to pick. The Jurassic series has done wonders for saying like, oh, now they have feathers. Oh, because that's the latest research and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I'll stick with that one because that was, when I was a little kid, I had a book all about dinosaurs that I just pored over. And I used to take a whisk broom and go outside, and a little patch of dirt, I would sweep away dirt, which would, get away at least in our house where it wasn't getting a lot of water. Um, you'd sweep away the dirt, and then you have like the hard soil underneath, which always had like
Right.
interesting shapes. And to me, those are like fossils that I was finding.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah, I just loved dinosaurs back then. And I had the little plastic bag of dinosaurs that didn't matter which company put them out. Everybody seemed to have the same molds
Mm-hmm.
or molds made from the other guy's molds. Um, so yeah,
Okay.
there's my
Well,
answer.
I can say without a doubt that is the first time we've had that answer. So you are unique in your answer, sir.
All right.
Very
You can't
cool.
forget those guys. Those dinosaurs, they're not in Jurassic Park. You Stegosaurus, you see him all the time. What about the other guy? Had a
Right?
fin. Yeah.
And get him in there. All right, Tad, thank you so much for being on the FSF Popcast today. Where can our listeners and viewers go to find out more about you, the work that you've done, and Comic-Cons that you'll be attending?
Um, I just did a con. I don't have any more scheduled for this year because we thought we'd be moving, and who knows when that's going to happen for real. I have a panel at San Diego Comic Con in July about, curiously, Darkwing Duck, and they're doing the Darkwing Duck comics, and I'm doing the new ones by Dan Kibblesmith. I'm doing the covers for, or at least one of the covers. I have one right here to decorate my shelf. This one I think just came out.
Very
So
cool.
that's fun, revisiting the characters and actually getting some decent cover work out of it. Online, I'm on BlueSky, Facebook, Instagram, and it's like I'm all that stuff all the time. That doesn't mean I'm posting. I'm keeping up with other things, and every once in a while I'll do a
Sure.
comment, and every once in a while I'll say, gee, I haven't posted anything. And it's like I got a project right now that I'd love to post stuff from, except it hasn't been announced yet, so I cannot post anything from it.
Fair
So
enough.
you can search around, you Google me, you'll find any number of people talking about me, and hopefully they figured things out. They know about the whole Rescue Ranger shirt thing.
There you go. All right. Well, we will put a note down in the show notes down below so people can look those up, and they'll be able to find you a little bit easier. We'll include some of your socials and, of course, your IMDb page as well for them to be able to see your resume,
Sure.
see what you've worked on in the past. Now, guys, if you haven't already,
Hold
now
on.
is it?
I forget
Yeah,
about
go
this.
ahead.
I actually have a Hellboy animated website. I still pay a small fee every year just to keep it alive because it's an archive thing. But
Okay.
if you look for Google Hellboy animated, it's on TypePad, one word. If you put those words together, you'll probably end up on it. And what that was to help promote these Hellboy direct to videos that we did. I did a blog, almost a weekly blog, while we were doing the show. And it really takes you through the process as it's happening. So that's
Okay.
a cool thing to look at for just, reading through it as it happened.
All right. Very cool. We'll be sure to include that as well. All right. So, guys, if you haven't already, this is a great time to remind you that following our show is completely free. That's right. It doesn't cost you a penny to click that subscribe button. So give us a follow here on YouTube. And if you're listening to us on your favorite audio podcast provider, please make sure that you're following us there as well, because doing so helps us to continue to grow and ensure that we get more amazing guests like Tad Stone's here today to come in and talk about all these fun things and have some great moments for you guys to be able to listen to. So please follow our show. It helps us more than you'll ever know. And be sure to check out Tad's work as well. I assure you there is something he has worked on that is going to make you go, oh, he did that? So yeah, it was kind of the moments I had. And again, guys, thank you for listening. Tad, thank you for being on the show. And may the force be with you as you continue to live long and prosper. Goodbye.
Oh, bye.
Copyright 2025 FSF Podcast. Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Podcast. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpodcast.com.